The meeting in Doha
The meeting in Doha possibly
will be important, or maybe not.
we'll see. But we're winning militarily. I would say it's almost a military victory already. And actually everything is very simple. After 2 days of exchange of strikes, the United States of America and Iran are once again sitting down at the negotiating table. And already on Tuesday, June 30, the US President's team and representatives of the Iranian regime will hold, as they said, urgent talks in Qatar. Trump stated that it was Iran who approached Washington and requested an urgent meeting. That is, less than 48 hours passed from the exchange of strikes to the announcement of urgent talks. But to get ahead of myself, I'll say that there's nothing urgent about these talks because they were actually planned in advance for Tuesday. In this episode, I suggest we try to figure out what's going on, and most importantly, who's winning here and who's losing. And you know, the answer turns out to be not as obvious as it seems, because new details have emerged that could completely turn this situation upside down. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write any comment you want. And also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link is in this video's description, along with all my social network links. So let's go step by step, because the chronology is very important here. It all started not with the United States of America, but with Iran. On Thursday, Iran attacked a cargo ship near Oman, which triggered retaliatory strikes by the US and counterstrikes. Iran struck American military bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. The US responded harshly. On Friday, the US military struck drone warehouses, coastal radars, and missile infrastructure in southern Iran. This included the Strait of Hormuz area and Qeshm Island, calling it a strong response to Iran's attack on a merchant ship. Immediately after this strike, Trump issued a threat that, once again felt like a real war was looming. Quote, "There may come a time when we can no longer be reasonable and will be forced to finish the job we started so successfully by military means. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist." Well, it seems that Iran was not intimidated by Trump's statement because in response, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced that due to the violation of the ceasefire, all diplomatic processes would be completely halted, and the American bases in the region, quote, "will face hell in the coming days." So keep this in mind. On Saturday and Sunday, Iran was ready to withdraw from the negotiations completely, or at the very least was bluffing quite convincingly. That is, by Saturday evening and Sunday morning, the situation was clear. The ceasefire is falling apart, both sides are threatening each other with destruction, and diplomacy is basically in question. But on Monday morning, Donald Trump announces an urgent meeting between the American and Iranian delegations in Doha. But what happened behind the scenes that made everything change so suddenly, and how did they go from exchanging blows to urgent negotiations? After looking into what happened, I can confidently say that there was a cold calculation on both sides. On June 17, the US and Iran signed a memorandum of understanding consisting of 14 points. It launched a 60-day period of negotiations for a final deal, which is supposed to permanently open the Hormuz Strait and end the war started by the US and Israel on February 28. The exchange of strikes this past weekend put this memorandum at risk. In fact, both sides have now stepped back in order to save it, so as not to actually destroy at least the agreements that are already on paper. But of course, neither the US nor Iran admitted to being the first to back down. The formula for backing down was businesslike and cold. Here's what an American official said. "Technical negotiations will continue on all aspects of the memorandum. Both sides are backing down for now, and ships can move freely through the Strait of Hormuz." In the end, the White House stated dryly that they had simply decided to halt all strikes against Iran. Well, just to be clear, there will be no response to the shelling of US military bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. And here is the key nuance that explains why the negotiations, as Trump stated, are urgent. And I would say that this is fear on both sides about what will happen if the memorandum framework really collapses now, if someone goes just a bit further and everything falls apart. For the United States of America, the collapse of the memorandum means a return to a full-scale war, which Donald Trump publicly declared to be over, and as a victory for the United States. But how can you return to a war that you supposedly already claimed? one that you ended and already won. For Iran, the failure of the memorandum means losing everything it has already gained from this deal, and it has gained quite a lot. And this brings us to the main question. So, who is winning right now? Well, let's break it down by points. Here's who has more points, and the answer will surprise you. Intuitively, of course, it seems like Iran is winning right now, because they're the ones getting a bunch of bonuses as a result of this phase of the war. And to get ahead of myself, I'll say that yes, to a large extent that's true, but let's break it down honestly. Because each side, both the US and Iran, has its own victory, and they don't cancel each other out. As paradoxical as it may sound, it's as if each side can declare victory, and neither would be lying. There are some very important nuances here. Let's start with what Washington is says about this. US Vice President J.D. Vance, who is personally conducting negotiations right now, stated the American position very clearly on Bill Maher's show. I'll quote him further. If we reach a final deal, great. If we don't, their nuclear program is already destroyed anyway. They are still much weaker as a country. So, my position is this. America wins either way. Yes, that's exactly how the formula sounds. So, J.D. Vance is openly stating that no matter what happens in the region now, the US will declare it a victory anyway, and it doesn't matter at all whether there will be a deal or not. Whether Iran keeps its nuclear program or not doesn't matter at all. In any case, it can still be declared a victory. That's a strong argument, and in fact, it can't be dismissed. Because from a military point of view, the US and Israel really did inflict heavy damage on Iran, to the point that during the war, Iran's supreme leader Khamenei and key figures of this regime were killed. And this is exactly what the US can now present as a victory. Well, completely forgetting that Iran's nuclear, missile, and drone programs have survived. All of Iran's proxy forces in the region have survived. Iran has achieved the lifting of sanctions and the unfreezing of assets, and now it is also gaining control over the Hormuz Strait, in fact. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. This is a very interesting point. But basically, at this stage, you could say that Trump is doing just that. He says we've crushed their military power. They don't have a navy, they don't have an air force. Their air defense is destroyed, they have no missiles left, and so on. So this is what the Americans can present as a victory. But now let's look at the same picture, but through the eyes of leading American analytical centers. And if you look at this through the eyes of analysts, the situation is reversed. The Council on Foreign Relations delivers almost a verdict. Quote, Donald Trump may have enjoyed the tactical achievements of the American and Israeli military, but he ended the conflict without a strategic victory on terms that seem to favor Iran. And then there's a list of what Tehran gets. According to preliminary data, Iran will receive relief from sanctions, and it will be able to sell oil, enrich uranium, and won't be required to dismantle its network of proxy forces in the region. And although Trump declared freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian officials insist that after 60 days they will still introduce a fee for passage. Just think about this last detail, because it is brilliant in its cynicism. The Strait of Hormuz was open even before the war. It was completely open. Remember, there were no restrictions at all. So, what's the victory of Donald Trump, who says he opened the Hormuz Strait? Think about this cynicism. Trump says we opened the Hormuz Strait and now it's free for navigation. Again, before the war, it was already open. It was already free. And now the US is paying by lifting sanctions just to reopen the Hormuz Strait, which was already open before the war. Iran took such a theoretical pressure point and turned it into a very real and powerful lever, imposing costs on the entire world economy and getting on Donald Trump's nerves. So Iran closed what was already open and then sold the reopening of the strait back for money and the lifting of sanctions. This is the very definition of a negotiation victory. It's when you, excuse my language, outplayed your opponent. Let's make it clear once again. Before the war, the Hormuz Strait was open. As a result of the war, Iran realized that it could use it as leverage and turned it into a real tool of pressure, and they said, that's it, we've closed the strait. Now they say, we can reopen it, but you have to lift the sanctions, return our frozen assets, and so on. A brilliant move. Moreover, the Atlantic Council points out a paradox that must be infuriating for the US and Israel. The regime in Tehran not only didn't collapse, it actually grew stronger strategically, having withstood a heavy US-Israeli strike and carried out effective counterattacks. Many countries in the region are now courting Iran, trying to reduce tensions, and this shows which way the wind is blowing right now. On the nuclear issue, the most important one, the US victory is just a mirage. There is no agreement except for a promise to negotiate on enriched uranium stockpiles. And Iran knows how to drag out such negotiations and bargain for concessions along the way. Let me remind you, since Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal in 2018 for the past, 8 years, America has been negotiating with Iran to renew the nuclear deal. 8 years! And Iran has managed to drag out this whole process for 8 years. Sometimes they almost agreed, then they changed their mind, then there were some other conditions, and so on. So, basically, there's your answer to the question of who is winning. J.G.D. Ewens is right that Iran is weakened militarily, but analysts are right that at the negotiating table, Iran is outplaying the United States of America point by point. Money, oil, uranium, the Hormuz Strait, proxy forces, that is, almost everything remains with it. It's not an either or no. This is a situation where Iran, which seemed to have lost the battle on the battlefield, still managed to win peace for itself. And who lost here? Unfortunately, if you look for a clear loser in this war, it's Israel. The deal between the US and Iran is a major blow to Israel and personally to Netanyahu, who considers Iran an existential threat. The war enjoyed broad support in Israel, and Netanyahu is now facing very tough elections in the coming months. And Netanyahu, who led Israel into war under the slogan of regime change in Tehran, ended up with a regime that survived and to some extent even became stronger. And it is Israel that is now the main stumbling block for the whole deal. This is about the situation in Lebanon. There is a fundamental contradiction here that is already essentially destroying the deal between the US and Iran, right from the very beginning. The trilateral agreement signed on Friday essentially contradicts the 14-point memorandum. Because according to Iran and Hezbollah, the memorandum provides for the end of the war on all fronts, including Lebanon. But Israel categorically refuses to withdraw its troops from Lebanon. Israeli Defense Minister Katz stated firmly, "There will be no redeployment or withdrawal of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon, not until Hezbollah is disarmed, across the entire country." Moreover, he revealed the scale of the destruction and his readiness to return to war. Israel destroyed 100 villages along the western part of the Lebanese border and about 73 in the rest of the area. 200,000 displaced residents of southern Lebanon will not be allowed to return home. And Israel is ready to resume war with Iran if Trump considers the negotiations to have failed. So, basically, Iran is demanding a complete withdrawal, Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon as a condition for the final deal. Israel will not leave until Hezbollah is disarmed. And Hezbollah only needs one missile fired at northern Israel for this whole arrangement to collapse. Who is quietly winning, so to speak? It's the Arab monarchies. Trump's deal with Iran is a huge relief for the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf, which have taken the brunt of Iranian attacks and suffered severe economic shocks. Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar basically had no alternative to the Strait of Hormuz for maritime oil exports. And they especially benefit from the resumption of critical oil and gas supplies. Why didn't I mention the Emirates and Saudi Arabia? Because they actually have alternative routes there, and the Saudis especially have shown that they can basically manage without the Strait of Hormuz. And for the countries I mentioned, any kind of peace is still better than having war on their doorstep. But even here, there is a bitter aftertaste for the United States of America. The Persian Gulf countries did not call for this war, but now they are the ones who have to deal with the consequences, and apparently without any help from the US. Because according to the memorandum, American troops are to be withdrawn from the areas around Iran within 30 days after the final deal. And this is also a very controversial point, because the Iranians insist on the withdrawal of American troops. And American media are already writing about plans to redeploy troops from Kuwait and Bahrain to Israel. And they call it some kind of victory, like it's a strategically smart decision. Donald Trump is a great war strategist. He decided that it's really necessary to withdraw American troops from the area threatened by Iranian missiles, which he supposedly already destroyed, and move them all to Israel. And in fact, their bases in the Persian Gulf are simply being destroyed. Now let's put this all together. The so-called urgent negotiations announced by Donald Trump after the escalation. This is not a breakthrough, but it's not a capitulation either. It's neither one nor the other. This is an acknowledgement by both sides that they have a shared interest in maintaining this fragile half-measure memorandum. The United States does not want another war it claims to have already won, while Iran does not want to lose its hard-won gains. That's why Donald Trump's rhetoric instantly shifted from threats to destroy Iran to an urgent meeting in Qatar. But as they say, you shouldn't be under any illusions about its stability. Even J.D. Vance himself admitted that a ceasefire will always be a bit messy when you're dealing with Iranians. That's his quote. Well, the structural contradictions haven't gone anywhere. Iran still plans to introduce a fee for passage through the Hormuz Strait after 60 days. Iran is still not giving up its enriched uranium. Israel is not leaving Lebanon. The nuclear issue has been put on the back burner, where, as analysts warn, Iran knows how to stall for time and bargain for concessions. It can already be said that after 60 days of this memorandum, Donald Trump will extend it for some more period. And in short, these negotiations will go on forever again. I'll say it again. Up until this point, Iran had been negotiating with the US for 8 years about resuming the nuclear deal. For 8 years, they were dragging someone by the sensitive parts and still didn't resolve anything. That's why a memorandum without a subsequent full-fledged deal will be unstable and impossible to maintain on its own. And without a separate understanding regarding the Strait of Hormuz, the US can easily end up sliding back into war with Iran again. So, if I were to answer the question of who is winning and who is losing, I would put it this way. Tactically, the US and Israel are winning, as they have really battered Iran's military power. They haven't destroyed it, but they've significantly weakened it. Strategically and at the negotiating table, Iran is winning as it has endured, become stronger, and retained its enriched uranium and proxy forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Shiites in Iraq, which managed to get sanctions lifted and assets unfrozen, and even got paid real money for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, even though it was already open. J.D. Vance says that America wins no matter what, and that's true, but only halfway, because Iran also wins no matter what. And these two victories exist at the same time. That means each side can say that they won. The war ended in such a way that both sides can present it to their people as a triumph. They can declare victory to their people. And that's the best sign that nothing has really ended. At the moment, there simply isn't a clear winner in this war, and that means that sooner or later, the US and Iran will end up exchanging blows again, or they'll just drag out these negotiations for years. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.
And it's really very simple. It's the denuclearization of Iran. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, and they're not supposed to have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that in all fairness, I would say. And it's really very simple. It's the denuclearization of Iran. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that in all fairness.